But a part of this is that Midtown has been in a sermon series that we've titled A Life Worth Living. And the concept is this, that as we look towards Easter, as we look towards the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, what is he asking us to live? As followers of his way, what is the life that is worth living that he is calling us to? We want to live a life of importance. We want to live a life of significance. We want to have a life of value. And culture oftentimes tells a story that says when we gain, when we hold on to, when we acquire, we will then find a life that is worth living. But when we look at the stories of Jesus, and we're going to look specifically in the book of Luke, when him and his disciples are on their way to Jerusalem, he has these numbers of stories that is just breaking down what this life is that's worth living. And it oftentimes looks a little bit more countercultural, where it's letting go, it's getting rid of, and it's releasing. So that's what we've been stepping into. And then you as University Vineyard, you guys have come out of a season of prayer and fasting and have entered into this time of looking at getting back to normal. So what are the normal things that you are entering into life coming out of a season of prayer and fasting? And this Sunday, you are going to look at back to normal in community. And the beautiful thing I like is that I think these two sermon series overlap. That today, we all get to look at inward, we get to go into our own life, and we get to ask the question of what is the life that Jesus is asking us to live. So things are crossing over pretty naturally. Now, as a good amount of you may know, I grew up in the University Vineyard. UV was my upbringing within church. I've been around since the senior citizen days, where we used to meet back there. I got to see this building be built. My name is written in Sharpie in the cafe on the concrete floor, which I think I was told after the fact that we weren't supposed to write on the concrete floor because it would show through the stain. So, whoops, you might be able to see my name somewhere. But as a teen, and as for those of you that have been around for a long time and have known my family, you knew that probably wasn't the only rule that I broke in my late teens. At my late teens, my early college years, I say that I was living the best possible way to exemplify to my younger siblings how not to live life. And I was doing a pretty good job of it. They've turned out amazing, so it was all worth it. It was very sacrificial of me to have this lifestyle that they could learn from, and they thank me for it every day. But that was me growing up. And as I look back, as I reflect on that now, as I reflect on my late teen, my early college years, I would say that I wanted to live an important life. I truly wanted to live a life of significance, one that was respected and honored, one that people looked to and admired me for. I wanted to be known, and I wanted to be remembered. Now, for me, this came in way of doing whatever it took to be cool within my cultural context, that my peers would accept me, they would like me, and they would look to me. Now, most of my time was consumed with parties, getting in fights, living promiscuously, and I was responding really to the culture around me. I was responding to a culture at large that was saying that a life worth living is one in which you find athletic success and you are popular. That was the cultural narrative that I accepted and was living out. And then in my immediate culture, my friend group, they would embrace me the more that I partied. They would look to me the more that I was cool. And they would embrace me. All these things would just keep going. And I wanted to live this important life, and I essentially was just responding to the culture that I put myself in, that I embraced, that I found my value in. Now, as I look back, I think my biggest question is, what was I doing? Why was I choosing to live that life? Why did I think that was actually a life of importance? Now, my specific influences and outcomes probably don't look the same as you. There might be some overlap. But I would ask you this morning, how are you trying to live an important life? In what ways are you trying to live a life where others respect and honor you? They look at you with admiration and they praise you for either what you do or who you are. Now, I have a few guesses that if we look around our culture right now, if we look at our larger and even our micro-cultural context, you would be told that living an important life is found in the next job promotion, that finding financial freedom is the pinnacle of success, that you are important when you have a certain amount of social followers, that people value and desire your thoughts and your opinions, that when your kids are acting in order and you are a parent that has it all together, others will then look to you as you have it all together and they want to be like you. The next relationship, the next vacation, the next new toy in the garage. We can continue and continue and continue. That this is the story that culture is telling where we have a life that is important. Now, here's the deal. I think we should be important people. I think we should live important lives that when others look at our life, they see it as something that's honorable. They see it as something respectable. They see it as something that they want to adopt, that they want to actually follow our way. And I would go as far to say that Jesus wants us to live an important life. But really, this life is that you have influence on others. Important life is one that has influence on others, and this is a good thing. So, this morning, wherever you're coming from, wherever you're at, do you feel like an important person this morning? Are you living a life of importance in your own eyes? Now, when you think about answering that question, are you right now feeling like an important person? Are you living an important life? When you think about that, what's your scale of measurement? How are you measuring whether you're living an important life or not? Is it just how you perceive yourself and think about the life that you're living? Is it looking to others and thinking about how they perceive you? Is that your measurement that you're living an important life or not? Trying to figure this out is by no means anything new. Trying to measure our importance seems to always be changing as our cultural narrative continues to change. That they continue just to redefine what it is to be living an important life. Even if we look back a couple thousand years, and we go back to the first century in Israel, we would see that this was also a challenge, trying to find importance. It was a constant struggle. And what ends up happening often is that when we look at this, we actually end up starting to find out that this important life is probably not so much what we actually think it is. So in the book of Luke, where we're going to turn to, which is the second book it's in the second half of your Bible. It's in the New Testament. It's one of the biographies on the life of Jesus. We're going to look at a section of his life in chapter 14. And again, like I mentioned earlier, as Midtown is in their sermon series, that he's on his way to Jerusalem with his followers, and he's just laying these things down for them of how to live their life. He is confronting the religious leaders of that time and correcting them, to say it gently. But I want to read from this, Luke 14, 7 to 11, and we'll have some of the slides up on the screen. So, what's happening here is he just entered into dinner with what were called the Pharisees. These were the religious leaders of the time. And he's hanging out with them, having dinner. He does a little healing, and he's talking to them about some stuff. And then he goes into this. When he noticed how the guests picked the places of honor at the table, he told them this parable. When someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for a person more distinguished than you may have been invited. If so, the host who invited both of you will come and say to you, give this person your seat. Then, humiliated, you will have to take the least important place. But when you are invited, take the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he will say to you, friend, move up to a better place. Then you will be honored in the presence of all the other guests. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. And I just feel like I can clearly hear Jesus saying that you can exalt yourself and be humbled, or you can humble yourself and I will exalt you. And what I want us to walk away with this morning is that a life of importance is the ability to choose humility. This is a life of importance. And it's something that we can actually all attain. The cultural narrative of an important life is not something that all people can attain. This is something that we can all attain. Now, if we look back a couple thousand years ago in the first century, this idea of the feast and the table placement and sitting in a place of honor and moving further away from the host, this was their culture. It wasn't just in these feasts. It was when they would have meals. What would happen is essentially the host was trying to surround themselves with people that were important, that people were honorable, that people were respected, because this is where the dealings, it was a patriarchal system, it was all the men, and they were trying to align themselves with the big names of their area so that they can do their dealings and they can just become more and more important in their life. So, to illustrate this in 21st century, we're going to check out a clip from the TV series The Office. So Michael, if you guys know anything about Michael Scott, he is just out of control in so many ways. But it's Phyllis's wedding here. So they're sitting at the dinner table, the place of honor, right? When you know you're at a wedding, you know that the bride and the groom sit here. So Michael comes up. This is Phyllis's new husband. And Bob Vance, right? He works in the office. He walks up. He says, "Hey, champ." And then this little dialogue of like, "Oh, I wouldn't have called you champ. I thought you were a kid." He's basically, "Hey, man, like move, like get out of this place." So then Michael awkwardly now is like, "Oh, well, can I freshen your bread, or can I, to give you more coffee?" And he's trying to figure out how to navigate getting out of this situation. It's totally awkward. So now he just keeps talking, and he doesn't know what to say. And then he starts making comments about the blue cake, and he doesn't understand how he never understood blue cake and what's it taste like. And then he goes on to say something like blue cake, and then he sings this song about blue balls, and he goes on from there. But essentially, what's happening here, and then we can end it there. You guys go ahead. But it's so good. And if you guys know this scene in The Office, like if you know this episode, we're probably friends. If you know that this is the deleted scene, we probably just became best friends. But what's happening here is he's absolutely humiliated. Like, it is embarrassing to watch this. A lot of the people in the crowd are like, "Man, I love watching awkward moments." And you guys are considered psychopaths because the rest of the people are like, "I can't watch these awkward moments. I can't do this. This is too much." And that's what happens here. So that was my best way of illustrating what's going on here in Luke 14 is that if you go grab the seat of honor, someone else that's more honorable that seat was reserved for is going to ask you to move. And you're going to be embarrassed by having to walk all the way back to the end of the table to the furthest seat away. And that's just Michael's life. So super awkward, super humiliating. Now, back to Scripture. So there's another translation of this passage out of the Message, which I thought summed this up pretty well. So in verse 11, the Message translation says this: "What I'm saying is, if you walk around with your nose in the air, you're going to end up flat on your face. But if you're content to be simply yourself, you will become more than yourself." And isn't that what we are all trying to do? That when we're trying to find a life of importance, we are trying to become more than ourselves. We're trying to attach ourselves to something that is more than ourselves. And I would say that if we want a life of importance, it is in the ability to choose humility. Now, the challenge with humility, it's not a feeling, it's not an emotion, it's not a desire. It's an action that we actually choose. It's something that we have to choose. So for those of us that want to have an important life, that we want to be good at something, we want to be remembered for something, to make a positive impact on the life of someone else, where in your life do you find yourself grabbing the seat of honor? Let's sit with that for a second. Where in your life do you find yourself trying to grab the seat of honor? Is it in your workplace? Is it in your friendships? Is it in your socioeconomic status? Maybe it might be in the desire to be right. If you look across your relationships, you're the one that I just need to be right in everything. Maybe it's your ability to achieve or to be good at something. Maybe it's to get the credit that you did something well. Where are you trying to grab the seat of honor? Now, Jesus paints a picture here, and I think the beautiful thing is that he's not against importance. He's not against there being a seat of honor. But what he is saying is, I want you to choose the seat furthest from the host, leaving space for others to come and sit. He's saying that a life of importance is the ability to choose humility. Now, this isn't easy because this goes against everything in our culture. Everything that we know about living an important life. All of a sudden, Jesus is saying that finding importance actually comes through becoming unimportant. Which when I hear that, I'm like, I don't even know what that means. I don't know how to actually do that. I'm wired to be important. I'm wired to find importance. But he's saying to become unimportant. So, as I mentioned earlier, it's hard for us to measure this. It's hard for us to measure our life of importance because our cultural context continues to shift. If we think about, for example, Harvey Weinstein, he was a film mogul, very successful over the last, however many years. Him and his brother found the company Miramax, which produced so many movies. We can rattle off a ton of names that everyone's familiar with. But he was a cultural icon. Until 2018, he had success, he had fame, he had money, he had freedom, he had everything. Everything that we would see as an important life. But in the end, he's been made a fool. Now, what's interesting about that is that his cultural context in working in this industry for the past 40 years or whatever, there was a different cultural narrative that was told for him. And early on, 40 years ago, it was that if he had an important, successful job, he would be an important person. And there was also a culture that those that were successful in business, that had relationships with other women outside of their marriage inside the office, that was actually something that was celebrated. That was okay, that they were respected for that. And then 40 years later, the Me Too movement comes along and completely exposes everything. And he ends up a fool. We could take a Confederate general, a leader in the southern U.S. during the Civil War. And in that cultural context, he was a leader. He was hailed as a hero. There were statues made. 150 years ago, those statues are being torn down in riots. He was made a fool. So you see, the hard part in finding how to live a life of importance is that what seems like a no-brainer today is exposed tomorrow as something that is foolish. What this tells me is that based on our own intuitions, based on our cultural narrative, there's no true north when we're trying to live a life of importance. For generation to generation to find this life of importance. There's statements of like, okay boomer right now. Well, at some point, it's probably going to be okay millennial. And it's the part of like looking at the generations, we can pick apart every single generation that went ahead of us. But in order for generation to continue living a life of importance, one which doesn't continue just to waver with the cultural narrative and the trend that is being told to us, is to align to a constant and consistent source. That a source which offers a value system that has proven the test of time, that is unchanging, that is unfailing. Now, if you think of some of the people who you would actually look back to and you would remember them as having an important life, you can think of Martin Luther King Jr., you can think of Nelson Mandela, you can think of Dorothy Day. The common virtue, and there's so many more, but a consistent virtue through all of them is that they chose humility. They even chose humility to a point at which their life was sacrificed. Their own personal being, their own ambitions, everything that they wanted to achieve in life, their own families, they chose humility at the peril of their own lives. They humbled themselves. They realized that a life of importance is one in which they chose humility. So this is the call of Jesus. That a life worth living where importance is defined by choosing the same humble posture day in and day out. That no matter what banquet or dinner table you find yourself at, you pick the place furthest from the seat of honor. In your workplace, is it the title that's on your desk? In your marriage, is being right your importance? In your singleness, is the importance found in the person that you are or hope to date? In your economic status, is it the size of your bank account? In your Christianity, is it your ability to be more righteous than others? A challenge we all face is the decision in which reality we want to choose to live in. See, we can either choose to see our world in the shallow ways in which it operates as our reality. The toys, the money, the surgical enhancements, we can choose this to be our reality. Or we can choose to see a reality that's beyond this world. A reality where there's a God of pure love, of pure goodness, of pure other-centeredness. Now, if we choose this as our reality, this means that we find our importance in taking on the character of our God. That we look at this way, this life worth living that Jesus talks about, and we follow it. no matter how countercultural it may be. And that is challenging. It's not easy. Jesus himself, his entire culture rejected him. The religious leaders, the secular powers, the crowds chanted for his crucifixion, abandoned by all those that were closest to him. And yet, proven by his resurrection and proven by history, there's never been a more important person than Jesus of Nazareth. There's never been a greater demonstration of taking the lowly seat at the table than that of Jesus' death on the cross. In this, Jesus was exalted. So if we believe that Jesus is in the most honorable place, if we truly believe that, do we recognize the connection that it came through the most humble place? And if we recognize that, if we believe that, if we believe Jesus is the most honorable place, do we trust God enough that he will handle the exalting of our lives if we handle the humbling of our lives? He will handle it. So, how can we humble ourselves today? University Vineyard, as you're in this sermon series of back to normal, and specifically this Sunday would have been in community, a healthy community practices humility. It's a building block to be a healthy community. In Midtown, as we explore a life that is worth living, a life of importance is in the ability to choose humility. And I don't think we have to go far for this. I think, first of all, we can start here. We can start here in church, that we can start here in the community that God has brought together for us to operate and press into this way of humility. And again, it's something that we have to choose day in and day out. But do something others may not want to. Look around. In what ways may you be serving yourself even within the church? It's so quick and it's so easy and it's so subtle. But we can try to find this life of importance even within the church. And if you want to counteract that, if you're not aware of maybe a way that that's happening right now in your life, go do something you don't want to do. Go do something that no one else wants to do. Go serve in the area that people grudgingly serve. Go find someone to serve that you may not want to serve. In your workplace, can you humble yourself by encouraging the success of others around you, whether they deserve it or not? In your finances, pull a chunk of the money that's sitting in your bank account that you have saved up and go give it away. In your neighborhood, in light of what's going on with coronavirus, who are the people on your street that need toiletries, that need toilet paper, that need groceries, that need yard care? Whatever it is, look around your street. In your faith, come alongside someone who might be gripped with fear and anxiety right now in light of the virus that is going on. And instead of just telling them to have more faith, love them, come alongside them, sit with them. Right now, in light of coronavirus, in light of this situation that we are in, this unprecedented territory, within a matter of weeks, our economy is tanking. People are afraid. Everything is being canceled. People are getting sick, some even dying. Maybe the Spirit can use this to shape us more than we think, to make us truly important people, people who care about other people before our own self-preservation, truly becoming more like God. Right now, as people of faith, there is a massive opportunity this crisis is providing us. That when we realize the stock market going down, when you have young kids and you're concerned about the future of our economy, when the realization that a simple handshake can lead to your death, in these realities, the interpretation of an important life coming from gaining status, achievement, and material wealth all seems pretty foolish. There was a famous defense attorney in the 70s who won the most cases of his time, was considered unbeatable. And when you're unbeatable as a defense attorney, you make a lot of money. So this man racked up a ton of money. And he lived the high life. They vacationed the world. He brought his family with everything that they did, lavish lifestyle, all these things. when he was dying and they gathered around his bedside table. When his family was there, when the people who were closest to him were standing there, he said this, "I have done it all. I have seen it all. None of it brings the importance that I long for." The reality of eternity which Jesus offers, love, giving generously, self-sacrificing, other-centeredness, this seems to make a lot more sense in living an important life, a life worth living. Now, we all have a choice. We have a choice to exalt ourselves or humble ourselves. Can you imagine a community, this community right here, adopting this full-heartedly? That we lower ourselves in everything that we do. Can you imagine a city that would adopt this? An entire city of people choosing humility above all else. Choosing humility. People and places being transformed by radical humility. Each person seeking to serve the needs of others, putting aside their own ambitions. If you can imagine that, if you can visualize what that looks like, you can go and do that. And I would encourage you to. As we walk away with this and go back into worship, a life of importance is the ability to choose humility.